The Boy in the Pyramid. Beheading the children had proved a folly. Since then, the nightmare. The nightmare of Astapor, the fires he'd seen there, the fires he'd seen so often in dreams. He had escaped the flames before, his own screams jolting him awake. Only this time, there was no escape. He was awake already. Mother of mercy. Beneath the plumes of smoke, the streets swelled with the fury of the Milanese. Their shouted curses, their shaking fists, the knives and whips and bricks they took up against the brazen beasts' steel swords. They'd clashed a dozen times today, from the east gate to the west, screams hemming him in from all around. The loudest clamors rose from the Silk Quarter. Were the beasts cutting down looters? The merchants themselves? He knew only that their blood flowed downhill, like other men's. The red stream flowed west, past the pyramid of Gazin, whose treasures were even now being carted away. The men moved haltingly under the weight of this wealth, stumbling over the corpses of those who died defending it. The blood finally pooled near the greatest spectacle, the Temple of the Graces, flames roaring from its upper windows, women screaming on the steps below, stripped of their colored robes. He looked away, turned to face the Great Pyramid. No doubt someone still cowered at its apex, but it was terror and slaughter that ruled Marine. Aside from the central plaza, held throughout the day by a wall of beasts, the only place free of fighting was the city's far south, which was free of people altogether. It was the lions who ruled there now. One prowled an alley just south of the Pyramid of Paul, his mane white as snow, but flecked with blood. The other male he'd lost sight of, but the lioness still lazed by Jarak's fountain, stripping the meat from a young girl's body. Someone had loosed the animals from the golden pit. Gods only knew why. Gods only knew why any of this could happen. This chaos, this cruelty, these corpses flung over the walls. Yes, who would loose such dangerous creatures? Sneered a voice inside him. Was this all his fault? His sin? Was he the rot at the root of the tree? He had only watched from here through the Mirish lens. As soon as the gates were shut behind Sir Barristan, men in locust masks had emerged from the Great Pyramid, leading a parade of children down to the Plaza of Purification. He'd remembered some of the cupbearers' names. Bakaz was one, the king's nephew. Kesmia and Grajar. Shai Mazara. Her smile gapped where she'd lost her milk teeth. The rest of the names he'd forgotten, as someday, he prayed, he would forget their faces. The handsome boy. The girl who liked to sing. The boy with the green eyes. Not one of them was older than 10. He'd forced himself to watch. He owed them that much. One boy had struggled, screaming threats and curses as his head was lowered. A few faced their fate with stolid bravery. The rest cried, like the children they were. The headsman was halfway through the line when the seething crowd surged forward, too enraged to go on watching. After that, the more he tried to make sense of it all, the sicker he felt. The Lorak boy was first to die. Whomever the locust masks served, it wasn't his dar. Yet if the king had been deposed in Barristan's absence, who had done it? The commander? The head of the brazen beasts? He knew nothing of the man, save that he was the king's cousin. Drink had once called him a lickspittle. Could that man have been such a monster? What had turned him against Marine's noble families then, and even his own kin? The Westerosi had no kin here. Sir Barristan? Could it have been his doing? Orders he gave before riding out? The thought made him shudder. No, impossible. Barristan the Bold would not have stood for the massacre of children. His own father had said as much once. Would that a man of honor were there, at the Red Keep. Alas, Sir Lewin, Sir Jonathor, and Sir Barristan had all been sent away. Sent away. He swung the lens tube west. The wall over the gate was manned by a dozen brazen beasts, surveying the battles within and without. Below them were thrice as many, standing sentry, guarding the winch. The old knight would not be coming back. The realization was a disquieting one. Sir Barristan had spoken of plots. Someone had tried to poison Daenerys, and the knight had suspected the king. The old fool. Some puppeteer had worked his limbs, and those tired eyes never saw the strings. Whoever they were, they'd seized their chance. They held the city, and the gates would stay closed. The White Knight would die, perhaps only a few feet beyond the walls, along with the Unsullied, the Stormcrows, and all the companies of freedmen. His stomach told him he had seen enough. Besides, it was time to change his bandages. Maester Kedry would have said as much, if he were here. He limped in from the parapet, crossed the sprawling Mirish carpet, and eased himself upon the great master's bed, between the wineskin and the jar of ointment. Then, gingerly, he unwrapped the silken strips over his right arm. The seared flesh beneath had gotten the worst of it by far. Even now the air stung his skin where the blisters had ruptured. That damned whip. His fingers looked like sausages, and he had not the courage even to try bending them into a fist. Would they ever bend again? The hand promised nothing but agony. It was of no use, other than to distract him from the lighter burns he bore. The left hand had fared much better, tender in places, but still a hand, a working one. With it, he uncorked the skin, and took a long swallow. The pain had kept him up these few days, the pain and his shame, but the lysine wine dulled both. He even thought he'd gotten an hour's doze last night, though he couldn't be sure. He took another sip, tasting the nutty flavor of poppy juice. It was delicious. Perilously so. No wonder my father drinks so much of it. He took another swig. When the skin was good and drained, he moved on to his legs. The burns on his thighs were minor, though he winced when he pulled the bandage from his singed manhood. It had stirred when he applied the ointment, making him howl as the cracked skin broke open. He would need to forget desire, deaden himself to it if he wanted it to heal. Another thing the wine is good for. His torso had been largely spared, but his neck... oh, his neck. He had found a silver hand mirror in one of the ladies' quarters, but he'd almost dropped it when he'd gotten a look at himself. The monkey mask had shielded his face from the scalding oil, but where the bronze had ended, the burns began. A red mess crept up his ears and cheeks, then over the top of his hairless head. He had never been a handsome boy, but now he looked a freak. No maiden dreams of a kiss from a burned man. For the rest of his life, people on the street would turn from the sight of him, feeling pity or disgust. That's what he had done at Astapor. But he was lucky that he could lament his days to come. For all his burns, none of them were oozing yellow. That meant there was no corruption. Not yet, at least. Thanks be to the mother, or to the ointment. For now his life was saved. The medicine he'd found was called Harpy's Balm, though the name must have been a healer's private joke. There was nothing soothing in its touch. As he slathered it on, it stung worse than the fire had. Yet he trusted in its worth. In this land of whips and chattel, the salve must be well tested. A scarred woman is worth little as a bed warmer, Maester Kedry had said. A dead one, even less. Or perhaps rubbing this stuff in serves for another round of whipping, he thought grimly. Still, he dabbed it on again, yelping each time the ointment met his flesh. My penance. Once he'd covered all his burns, he reached for the side table, where the arak of Valyrian steel lay. He cut off yard-long strips from the roll of linen bandages, then began the slow process of wrapping himself up. When he'd finished, he looked like a dead Giscari king, ready to weigh his heart on the Harpy's scale. The jar of balm he'd carried up was nearly finished, as was the roll of bandages, but that mattered little. The storeroom below had hundreds of crates, all filled with these jars and rolls. They must have been cruel masters, the men of Ahlez. And the pyramid's belly boasted more than bandages and balm. So long as the stone above him held, and the looters kept away in fear, he had everything he needed. Everything and more. The cistern was full of rainwater, free from the pale mare, The wine cellar was bursting with vintages from the Arbor, Karth, even E.T. He could dress himself in the city's finest silks, lie on its most luxurious beds. He had no servants, but otherwise he was living like a Myronese noble. And more than anything, he was eating like one. The first storeroom he wandered into had been filled with barrels of chickpeas and millet and beans. The next was all shelves, crowded with vegetables, eggplant and mushrooms, leeks and garlic, onions and okra. Another had jars of olives and olive oil, pomelos and pomelo vinegar, fish and fish sauce. He found clay casks filled with pickled beets, pickled parsnips, pickled turnips. Then there was the salt mutton, the salt goat, the salt dog. From the sea, dried squid, dried eel, dried herring, and the camel lard, the lamb kidneys, the dog sausages. When he'd thought he'd seen everything, he'd stumbled upon jars of sour grapes and tart prunes, dried figs and roasted pistachios, sweet butter and cured cheese. For the truly hungry, one storeroom offered pots of unborn hedgehog, which smelled even worse than the fermented grubs. There was a room just for spices, cinnamon and sesame, mint and anise, poppy seeds and cardamom. A barrel, an entire barrel of saffron. He had yet to take a complete inventory, but the spices alone would raise enough to buy a ship, hire a crew, and live out the rest of his days as a very wealthy man in the city of his choice. Then there were those leather tomes from Ashai, the Valyrian tapestries, the porcelain from Lung, all priceless. If he could sell them, he would be beyond rich. Then he could... Am I a thief? He asked himself. But the question was ridiculous. Of course he was. The proof was writ all over his body. The treasures of Uhlaz were his now, he decided, but they were not for his indulgence. He looked outside again. Even from the bed he could see the Great Pyramid looming over him. His friends were there, sharing a dark cell somewhere deep within, as hostages for when the Dragon Queen turned west. He had to rescue them. But how? This was not Duskendale. He was no Sir Barristan. Barristan the Bold. Slaver's Bay was not made for the guileless sort. Another kind of knight, then. What about the Red Viper? How would he have done it? With an army. With the scum of the earth at his back. Forming a company couldn't be too difficult, could it? The pyramid's armory had more than enough steel. He only had to find willing cutthroats, and pay them with moonstones pried from his bedposts. Zahrina could help him round up the muscle, if the crone still lived. How many would I need? 200? More? Many would die just getting into the Great Pyramid. Mayhaps it could be bloodless, if I bribed enough of the brazen beasts. The pyramid shook. Furniture rattled all around him. Somewhere above there was a crash, a vase shattering. Then a crack that echoed through the room. Welcome home. The thing had made its lair on the upper floors. That was a blessing of sorts. The threat of dragonfire had first driven the House of Uhlaz out of its own pyramid, and then kept ruffians well away. Yet the monster was just above him, and the pyramid was not built to be a dragon's nest. How many had died when the pyramid of Hazkar collapsed under Rhaegal's weight? Hundreds? And Viserion was as big as his brother, or near enough. He tried not to look at the crack in the ceiling. The crack he knew was growing. Mother have mercy. He had said the same prayer in the dragon pit. Then, darkness, all at once. The big man must have knocked him to the floor and smothered him. Under the cloak he'd writhed and screamed, as if he'd been afire still. For what seemed like an age, he knew nothing but the darkness, and the pain, and the song. It was a terrible thing, that song. Hoarse and harsh and dissonant. The savage refrain filled his heart with pity. It was an old song, about a boy who hadn't survived his grand adventure, a boy who hadn't come back home, a boy whose deeds, when counted, were slight and meager. It was a sad song, an ugly song, a song of failure. He had failed them, his people, his friends, his father. All that was left was to weep for that burned boy. For himself, screaming, he waited to die. Yet he didn't. Instead, his screams were met by others. "More meat! The big chain! The big one! It won't hold! No! No! No!" He heard metal shattering, crossbows thumping, beasts roaring, men howling. Then there was nothing but his own heavy breaths and the sounds of dragons. He wanted nothing more than to stay under that cloak. When he was young, his mother had his blanket embroidered, glyphs of old Norvos, she had told him, an enchantment to ward off monsters, and he'd been foolish enough to take comfort in such a thing. Lord Anders had told him as much shortly after he'd arrived at Ironwood. He would not get the blanket back, so that he would learn his lesson. Spells were lies for children. Only prayer protects us. So as he pulled the cloak aside and peered out, he prayed. Mercy. The dragons were feasting. The white one had half of Pretty Maris dangling from its maw. Then, with a slurp, that too was gone. Kago was pinned beneath the green one's claw, beating helplessly against it with his remaining arm, until suddenly he was flung against the wall and went limp. 3 other bodies were strewn about the room, amongst the broken chains. The flesh on these had been turned black, and the masks they wore wept tears of bronze. Mercy. His friends were still alive, huddling in a corner, eyes wide and locked on the dragons. One of the windblown was with them, but burned, already dying. His mask was lost, revealing an old and frightened face. Mercy. The dragons worked their way through the corpses. They were still hungry. Now and then their jaws would break through bone with a sickening crack, so their prodding tongues could get at the marrow. Finally, Rhaegal knocked over the butcher's cart, scattering the meat they'd brought across the floor, a spear of fire to cook the pile at once. And then the brothers began their second helping. Smoke rose from the lambs, adding an aroma of burnt meat to the sulfur air. He coughed. When Viserion's gaze met his, he could not look away. It took another bite, still regarding him suspiciously. It chewed, with heavy snorts. "Quentyn," the dragon seemed to murmur. "Quentyn." Mother, he thought. She hasn't forgotten me. She's watching. "Please," he said, his voice a croaking whisper. "Let me live. Mother, please. Mother. Mother, have mercy." His features moved to weep again, but his eyes were too dry for tears. There was a puff from its snout, but it sounded to him like Dorn. She knows my failure. For a moment, her golden eyes seemed to look down on him with forgiveness. "I wanted to be a good son, I did. One you would have been proud of. A son of Dorn. I'm sorry. So very sorry." "Quent, no!" called Drink, but he was already stumbling toward the dragons. Stopping only to collect Kago's arak, he made his way to Viserion's neck. The dragon lay out flat on its belly. He could have ended the thing's life then and there. Instead, he found himself upon its back. Viserion crawled through the great hallways as he called out left and right, reversing the directions he had put to memory. When they made their way back to the Great Pyramid's entrance, the white wings unfolded. And then, it was like a half-remembered dream. There was wind, and rain, and fear. "Why do I live?" had been his thought upon waking, when he'd found himself amongst the thorns in Uhles's garden. Why me? Cletus had died. So had Maester Kedry. So had Willem. All better men. Where was the justice? Justice. A fiery death would have been that. Would have been what he deserved. And then, surely, the flames of the 7 hells. The Father's judgment. Quentyn took the near-empty jar of ointment in hand and considered it in the light. There is no greater balm than the god's forbearance. Those were the words of the 7-pointed star. Or perhaps it was the Book of Holy Prayer. Regardless, he knew that he was alive only by the Mother's will. only by her mercy. She had stayed her husband's hand, tempered his wrath. She had saved him, carried him, delivered him again. And here I am, a babe anew, red and hairless beneath my swaddling clothes. Yet what would she have of the prince reborn? A second life of prayer and fasting? Then why provide him food? Of humility, as a begging brother? Then why the wealth? In days of old, a pious knight might join the warrior's sons, but that was an order long forgotten now. Where was the place for him? Balor the Blessed had heard the voice of the Seven, only for his fervor to breed folly. One of his darker deeds had been to imprison his sisters in the Maiden Vault. For what reason, no sane man could say. He imagined Ariane locked away like that, and laughed aloud. She wouldn't abide it a week. His sister would make some cunning escape, no doubt aided by Sir Andre Dalt and Silva Santigar, or perhaps the Sand Snakes. That was her way. She would submit to nothing and no one, respecting only the bonds of friendship. And Arch and Drink were his friends. More than friends. They'd grown up together, crossed the world together, battled foes together, faced dragons together. Whatever fate the mother might now weave, their threads were forever entangled with his own. He would not flee Marine without them. He needed to free them from their cell. Then, somehow find a ship. Another crash, this time from below. Someone was here. Looters? The kin of Ahles. Quentyn had feared this. Fearsome as a dragon might be, men had risked their lives for far less than the fortune this one guarded. He rose from bed, grasping the hilt of Kago's arak in his one good hand. He made it as far as the open door, then froze. He could hear their footsteps now. Several men, already coming up a stairwell. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness of the hallway, voice raw and cracking, as though he'd forgotten how to speak. "This one is not here to harm you," answered a soft voice behind him. Quentyn reeled around, but saw no one. Then he lowered his gaze and met two eyes the color of molten gold. Dragon eyes. Panic gripped him, and he pulled back the arak. "No, it's a girl," he realized. He checked his blade. "You!" he wondered aloud, recognizing the scribe from Nath. "How?" "Frog Boy is there," called a gruff voice from the hall. Quentyn looked back through the door. From the gloom emerged 4 Giscari men, pit fighters by his guess. His left hand gripped the arak tight, but their own weapons were sheathed. 3 of the men, he could see, were wielding only dog sausages, and the 4th, he could smell, had found a pod of unborn hedgehogs. "This one is sorry for her companions. You may know of his great appetite," said the girl, her voice high and sweet. Quentyn squinted. "Is that Belwas?" The bald man looked a great deal thinner after his brush with death, and paler too. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his scarred skin hung from his flesh like an old man's. How would this sickly fighter fare against a Valyrian steel blade? But that thought only made Quentyn picture himself dead, covered in shards of pottery and the slime of hedgehogs. He lowered the arak, knowing he was no fit opponent for a champion of the pits, especially fighting left-handed. "This one's other companions are the squires of Sir Barristan. Their names are Gaznak, Gazdan, and Grasdan." Of course they are. He considered the sausage-laden squires. They were clearly brothers, sharing the same pinched nose. One was of an age with Quentyn, the other's a little younger. "Are you here for food?" he asked. "For loot? In the kitchens there is silver cutlery. Take as much as you can carry and be gone." This one did not come for wealth, but for you. For me? Could they want to punish him for releasing the dragons?
"Yes, you. Little Missandei says you are useful."
Strong Belwas flashed a toothy grin, then sucked a hedgehog into his mouth hole. As he crunched his way through it, he went on, nodding sagely.
"War is inside city. War is outside city. Things are bad."
Quentyn let out a bark of laughter. "I'm only burned, neither blind nor deaf. Who rules the city? Not Hisdar, I'll wager." His Magnificence Hisdar Zolorak is held deep beneath the Great Pyramid, said the little scribe. Screaming day and night, said the oldest squire, who might have been any of Gaznak, Gazdan, or Grasdan. I hear the shave-pate is taking his fingers, one by one, until he confesses to the poisoning attempt on the queen. Then the shave-pate is king. The girl pursed her lips. Skahaz Mokandak styles himself the first citizen of Marine, a leader among equals. His first edict was that the gates of Marine shall stay closed. His second, for every brazen beast cut down, the noble families shall provide restitution. That is why he chose to execute the cupbearers. Blood pays for blood, a life for a life. That's not justice, said Quentyn. It's vengeance. This one knows too well. When the queen's servant's stalwart shield was murdered, he cut down 6 before he died. So 6 more servants were taken. Among them, one called Mosidor. Mosidor was this one's brother. It is the way of Gis. Not Gis. The world.
The ugly man shaves his head,
Belwas said through a mouthful of hedgehog.
But you can still see tiny hair. Hair like the great masters, but very short. Same for his rule.
He guffawed and leaned over, exposing his naked scalp.
Strong Belwas is not shavehead. No hair, see? Strong Belwas will kill the ugly man for little Missandei, and wipe his ass with the cloak he wears.
Quentyn knew this was no empty threat. To hear Arch tell it, Belwas had beheaded Marine's champion, made night soil next to the body, and used the noble's cloak to clean his bottom. Humiliated for all the world to see. A bad end by any measure. He thought of his own family. If the Martells had a champion, it was surely his Uncle Oberyn. If the Red Viper were to be killed in a duel, and then shamed so, he had no doubt the Sand Snakes would. It was you, he blurted out. The poison wasn't meant for Daenerys or even Hisdar. It was meant for you. Belwas stopped chewing and stared agape. But Missandei nodded. Yes, the widows of House Paul would find his death sweeter than any honey.
Old ladies must die,
the big man bellowed, so loud that one of the Giscari brothers dropped his sausage. No! Yelled Quentyn. His hand throbbed with pain. Enough of this! No more! We should leave this city. He turned to Missandei. You escaped the Great Pyramid, with those brazen beasts all around. How? The Great Pyramid has doorways, known to but a few. Secret passages. He remembered the dark labyrinth beneath the pyramid, and the dungeons. Certainly some tunnel must lead to the cell holding Arch and Drink. What of my friends, the other Dornishmen? Can we get to them? They are outside the walls, said the little girl. Outside? The wine he'd drunk turned sour in his stomach. Sir Barristan sent them to the tattered prince, to sway the wind blown to his side. But Tatters is dead. This one was with him when he passed. He was smiling. This one thinks he found amusement in your ruse. Our ruse? He thought of Drink's easy smile. It's not what you would call honorable, he had once said. What had he done? Quentyn had wondered at first why Sir Barristan never sent men looking for him, the fugitive. So the Prince of Tatters died the Prince of Dorne. But you knew. Why didn't you tell Sir Barristan? Why help us? Her golden eyes flitted over his bandaged form. The children of the Queen spared you. It is not for this one to condemn, and it would not have saved the dying man. So twice he had been spared. But why? This girl plays her own game, he thought. But he knew not what it was. Quentyn suddenly felt lost. And now they are in the fray. I don't know what to do.
Strong Belwas likes Whitebeard. He is my squire, and he is outside.
Marcellin is beyond the walls as well. He is the last kin to this one. Then we rescue them, one of the brothers said simply. Sir, your brother, your friends. We rescue them all. Rescue? It was impossible. Saving Arch and Drink from the cells of the pyramid was one thing. He'd have time to plan, gather an army, time for his burns to heal a little more. Instead, his friends were in the middle of a raging battle. He would need to act at once, if he was not too late already. How? We open a gate, Missandei said. Give the soldiers a safe haven to retreat to. A gate? Ridiculous. 100 brazen beasts guard each one. We have no time to hire swords, and as it stands, we are but 6. No, Missandei smiled. We are 7. The pyramid shook. Mother of mercy.